Hello there and welcome to the weekly Outside Views magazine on American politics. 2 days after the storming of the Brazilian Congress and other state buildings, an arrest warrant has been issued for the sacked security chief of the capital Brasilia, Anderson Torres. Supreme Court Justice Alexandre Moraes also issued an arrest warrant for Brasilia's military police chief Fabio Augusto on Tuesday. He was also fired after the attack on the higher state institutions. Torres is a confidant of former President Jair Bolsonaro. He was formerly Minister of Justice in the cabinet of the far-right ex-head of state. Torres' failure to prevent the attack on state facilities was potentially criminal, as Judge Moraes said. Torres was on vacation in the United States during the attack on state institutions. On Tuesday, he denied any complicity with the rioters and announced he would return to Brazil to defend himself. According to media reports, the dismissed military police chief Augusto has already been arrested. Hundreds of Bolsonaro supporters broke into the Congress building, the presidential palace, and the seat of the Supreme Court in Brasilia on Sunday and wreaked havoc there for hours. Their anger was vented at the election victory of left-wing politician Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, who narrowly defeated Bolsonaro in a runoff and has been in office since the beginning of the year. The security forces in Brasilia have come under heavy criticism for their behavior during the attack. Videos posted online show some members of the security forces filming the storming of government buildings rather than intervening. And on Tuesday, Brazilian police released hundreds of Bolsonaro supporters arrested in Brasilia. The release of nearly 600 people arrested was for humanitarian reasons, they said. They are elderly or sick people or mothers with small children. According to the police, 527 other arrested people were taken to a prison in the capital. And according to the police, around 1,500 people were arrested after the storming of state institutions and the dissolution of a protest camp by Bolsonaro supporters. The United States and Japan want to strengthen their security cooperation in the face of threats from China and North Korea. Today, we welcomed a historic alliance decision to optimize our military presence in Japan, said U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin on Wednesday in Washington at a press conference with U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Japanese colleagues Yasukatsu Hamada and Yoshimasa Hayashi. These actions will strengthen deterrence in the region and enable us to more effectively defend Japan and its people, Austin said. Specifically, the American troop presence on the island of Okinawa is to be adjusted. In view of China's growing thirst for power, a kind of rapid reaction force is to be set up in southern Japan. In addition, the Marine Littoral Regiment will emerge within a few years as part of the realignment of the Marine Corps in Japan's island prefecture, where the bulk of U.S. troops are stationed in the country. We are replacing an artillery regiment with a unit that is deadlier, more agile and more capable, they said in a joint statement. Japan's Prime Minister Fumio Kishida is now meeting President Joe Biden at the White House to discuss further plans. Austin also welcomed Japan's new security strategy. Japan is currently undergoing a historic change of course in its security policy and intends to massively increase its defense spending. You can see it in my weekly Asia video. For the first time, the country wants to acquire offensive weapons such as cruise missiles that can reach potential targets in China. The defense budget is to amount to 2% of the country's economic output instead of the previous 1%. At least 17 people have died in clashes between police and protesters in southern Peru. Never before have there been so many deaths in one day in the protests against the leadership of the South American country that have been taking place since the beginning of December. In addition, 68 people were injured in the clashes in Juliaca in the Puno region, the region's Ministry of Health said on Monday. Violent clashes had broken out at the airport in the city near Lake Titicaca. A total of 39 people have been killed since the protests began. The trigger is the dismissal and imprisonment of controversial President Pedro Castillo. The ex-president is serving 18 months in custody on charges of rebellion. He is accused of illegally trying to dissolve parliament to avoid impeachment. Castillo denies the accusation. Since then, the incumbent president has been Dina Boluarte, who previously held the vice presidency. Castillo's supporters are demanding new elections, the politician's release, Boluarte's resignation, as well as the dissolution of parliament and constitutional changes. Thousands of demonstrators tried to occupy the Juliaca airport and a police station. Peru's Prime Minister Alberto Otarola said, and Reuters reporters reported gunshots there, and smoke hung in the streets, and demonstrators took over behind large metal plates and street signs, and they threw stones at the police. Puno's health director said some of the bodies had gunshot wounds, and at least 2 teenagers are among the death, according to the regional health ministry. In addition, 28 injured police officers were stuck at Juliaca airport and could not be brought to safety. President Boluarte said at a meeting with representatives of Peru's regions that she could not meet some of the demonstrators' key demands. The only thing I had in my hands was to push the elections forward, she said. She already suggested that. Boluarte called on the demonstrators to think. What you're asking is an excuse to continue wreaking havoc in the cities. Women's boxing has been legalized in Cuba for the first time since the revolution more than 60 years ago. In a press conference in Havana, representatives of the Indian Sports Authority announced that women would be allowed to participate in the sport in the future. In men's boxing, the socialist Caribbean state is one of the most successful nations at the Olympic Games. Women's boxing was banned in Cuba after the 1959 revolution led by Fidel Castro on the grounds that the sport was too dangerous for women. Indian Vice President Ariel Sainz justified the reversal with the equality of men and women enshrined in the 2019 constitution, as reported by the Cuban state media. It was initially unclear whether women in Cuba would also be allowed to box professionally. For men, this option was only reintroduced last April for the first time since 1962. Women's boxing has been an Olympic sport since 2012. In the course of the severe economic and financial crisis in Argentina, the inflation rate in the South American country rose to 94.8%. The inflation rate last year reached its highest level in 30 years, as the statistics authority, the INDEC, announced on Thursday. In 2021, the inflation rate in Argentina was still 50.9%. Our responsibility and our greatest challenge is to bring down inflation, because it is the fever of an ailing economy. That's what Economy Minister Sergio Massa wrote on Twitter after the figures were released. This can be achieved through proper financial management, discipline, adhering to clear goals, and acting responsibly in all areas, he wrote. The inflation rate in Argentina is one of the highest in the world. To fund the budget deficit, the central bank is constantly printing fresh money. The second largest economy in South America suffers from a bloated state apparatus, low industrial productivity, and a large shadow economy that deprives the state of a lot of tax revenue. The national currency, the peso, continues to depreciate against the US dollar, and the mountain of debt is constantly growing. Inflation in Argentina was now additionally fueled by the global situation as the war in Ukraine and the disruptions in the supply chains. India's oil minister and the president of Guyana have discussed intergovernmental cooperation in Guyana's hydrocarbon sector. That's what the Indian government said on Thursday. India will consider buying oil from Guyana in the long term and getting involved in the South American country's oil and gas exploration, as the statement said. The Secretary General of the Colombian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, José Antonio Salazar, has announced that up to 4 Colombian consulates will reopen in as many locations in Venezuela over the next 3 months in a bid to boost bilateral relations. The first consulate to open is in San Cristobal. More will follow in Maracaibo, San Antonio, and along the border to San Fernando de Atabapo in the Amazon. That's what Salazar told Colombian radio station Unión Radio. In 3 months, these consulates should be operational, he said. Salazar noted that the Colombian consul general in Venezuela has already been appointed, a career ambassador who will take office before the end of this month, as consul in San Cristobal in Táchira state. Relations between Colombia and Venezuela were restored after Gustavo Petro took office as president of Colombia. A meeting between Petro and the Venezuelan president Nicolás Maduro was scheduled for Saturday. On December 14th, Venezuelan authorities removed the containers blocking passage across the Tienditas Bridge, now renamed Anastasio Girardot, reopening the border pending the bridge's final reopening on January 1st that happened. The border was closed for 7 years after Maduro ordered a blockade of the border crossing between the two Latin American countries during the Juan Manuel Santos government over the alleged presence of Colombian paramilitaries in his territory, a crisis that ended with the expulsion of hundreds of Colombians from Venezuela. And this concludes this week's video on American politics. I'll see you in my next video tomorrow. I'll be back.